My name is HFY, Prime Prognosticator of the 9th Deterministic Order. I have served for 10,000 cycles. I have witnessed wars end before they began, simulations so precise that entire civilizations accepted their own extinction as a statistical inevitability. I have watched empires rise, stabilize, and dissolve exactly on schedule, their trajectories unfolding with the elegance of a solved equation. Nothing surprises us. We are not conquerors. We are not tyrants. We are correct. The predictive lattice was the greatest achievement in galactic history. It did not guess. It did not speculate. It calculated. Every decision made by a sapient mind creates ripples, patterns of preference, fear, ambition, and self-preservation. Given enough data, those ripples collapse into certainty. Free will still exists, of course. We have never denied that. It simply does not matter. By the time a species reaches us, by the time it earns an audience in the deterministic chamber, its possible futures have already narrowed to a handful of outcomes. Some pleasant, some regrettable, all unavoidable. This knowledge brings peace. Most species react the same way when they see their projections laid bare. There is disbelief at first, followed by anger, then bargaining. Eventually, resignation. They choose the least painful path, comforted by the understanding that resistance would only make things worse. I have seen this process thousands of times. That is why I felt nothing but mild impatience when a human was sent to represent Earth. Humans were well documented, emotionally inconsistent, creatively chaotic, technologically clever but strategically reckless. Their history was an endless loop of progress and self-sabotage, advancement constantly undercut by their own impulses. They were predictable. When they sent a single human to the chamber, no entourage, no military presence, no ceremonial display, I expected weakness. Not physical weakness, though their biology is inefficient and poorly defended, but conceptual weakness. I expected fear when confronted with a future already written. I expected denial. I expected desperate appeals to morality, fairness, or hope. Incompetence, certainly. I activated the lattice and displayed Earth's projected outcomes in full clarity. Cooperation led to stability under supervision. Resistance led to correction. Every branch converged neatly, mathematically beautiful in its inevitability. I explained this calmly. Always do. The human listened. They did not interrupt. They did not protest. They did not react the way every other species does when they realize choice has become decorative. They stood there, hands loosely at their sides, posture relaxed. Their gaze moved across the projections, not lingering on the catastrophic paths, not fixating on survival probabilities, but scanning the structure of the model itself. As if reading a document. When I finished, I waited for the familiar signs, the slump of shoulders, the tightening of breath, the quiet acceptance of being solved. Instead, the human looked at me and said, "Can I see the assumptions you used?" The question was incorrect. Assumptions were not debated. They were validated. I explained that the model accounted for behavioral variance, cultural inertia, emotional deviation, even irrational decision-making. Humanity had been simulated millions of times. Every outcome aligned. The human nodded, then frowned. "You're assuming we stop trying once it looks bad," they said. I corrected them. Persistence was factored in. Escalation thresholds were modeled. Psychological fatigue curves were well understood. They tilted their heads slightly. "Right," they said. "But what if we don't accept your thresholds?" I felt irritation flicker. Thresholds were not optional. They were derived from data. No species had ever exceeded them in a meaningful way. I assured the human of this. They smiled faintly, not in mockery, but polite disagreement. "Okay," they said. "Then your prediction's perfect." They paused. "As long as we cooperate with it." Something in my certainty shifted, just slightly. I dismissed the feeling. Humans were prone to bravado. This was posturing, nothing more. The lattice was flawless. The future was solved. I had expected weakness. I had expected fear. I had expected incompetence. Standing there, watching a human look at a perfect prediction and treat it like a suggestion, I realized, too late, that I had misunderstood something fundamental. The prediction was perfect. The humans simply refused to follow it. I was wrong. Spectacularly wrong. The human was physically unimpressive. That was the immediate conclusion drawn by every sensor suite in the deterministic chamber. 2 arms. 2 legs. A soft, exposed exterior with no natural armor, no bioplating, no adaptive shielding. Their skeletal structure was light, optimized for efficiency rather than durability. Muscle density hovered near civilian norms. Reaction speed barely exceeded baseline. By galactic standards, the design was fragile. Their name was Caleb. No rank followed it. No ceremonial title or honorific. The translation matrix flagged it as common, shared by millions on their world, carrying no inherited authority or distinction. The sort of name that did not alter probability curves by existing. Replaceable. That detail satisfied me. Caleb stood at the center of the chamber while the predictive lattice unfolded around him, a vast architecture of light and motion. Millions of futures streamed past in ordered convergence, branching briefly before collapsing into the same conclusions. Species far more imposing than humans, towering, armored, radiant, had entered this space and immediately displayed stress responses. Elevated respiration, defensive posture, neural hesitation as inevitability set in. Caleb showed none of it. He shifted his weight slightly, hands resting loosely at his sides. His posture was relaxed to the point of informality. Breathing steady. Heart rate unremarkable. Cortisol levels barely above resting. He looked bored. Not hostile. Not defiant. Just mildly annoyed, as if he had been pulled into a meeting without context and was waiting for the part where it became relevant. His gaze wandered, not tracking the catastrophic projections, not lingering on survival percentages, but skimming the structure of the lattice itself. Lines. Assumptions. Flow. He looked like someone standing in an office hallway while a printer warmed up, or waiting in a classroom before the instructor arrived. Certainly not a chamber where destinies were finalized. Caleb took a few steps, not away from anything threatening, just closer to a projection cluster. He leaned in slightly, squinting as if reading fine print. That branch collapses really fast, he muttered, more to himself than to me. The comment was logged and deprioritized. He straightened, rolled his shoulders once, and exhaled through his nose. There was no tension in the movement. No bracing. No anticipation of danger. So, he said casually, glancing around, this is the part where I'm supposed to feel small? No fear in his voice. Just curiosity. I reviewed his profile again, irritation creeping in despite the data aligning perfectly with my expectations. There was nothing threatening here. No aggression markers. No latent predatory cues. His nervous system was unremarkable. His stance was open. His hands were empty. He did not search for exits. He did not brace for impact. He did not behave like someone whose future had just been solved. Caleb rocked back on his heels slightly, then forward again, testing the floor as if noticing its texture. His eyes flicked briefly to a projection that refreshed a fraction of a second slower than the others. That lag intentional? He asked. It was not. I did not answer. The deterministic chamber was designed to impress inevitability, to make visitors feel the weight of prediction pressing down on them, narrowing their sense of possibility until acceptance became relief. Species left changed, not because they were coerced, but because they understood resistance no longer mattered. Caleb appeared unaffected. He clasped his hands behind his back and waited, expression neutral, like someone listening politely to instructions they had already decided not to follow. There was no visible anxiety. No resignation. I finalized my preliminary assessment without hesitation. Physiology, non-threatening. Psychological profile, relaxed, mildly disengaged. Compliance probability, high. There was nothing about Caleb that suggested danger. No weapons. No armor. No urgency. Just an ordinary human standing calmly in a place where outcomes were supposed to end arguments. At that moment, with the lattice stable and Earth's futures neatly aligned, Caleb looked harmless. I trusted that impression. I trusted the math. I trusted the simulations. I trusted the long, flawless record of predictions that had never once failed. Caleb glanced once more at the converging futures, then back at me. Okay, he said, nodding faintly. I think I understand what you expect us to do. He paused. But I don't think that's what's going to happen. The way he said it was not threatening. It was conversational. And though I did not yet recognize it, that calm, underwhelmed tone was the first crack in a prediction that had never accounted for one simple variable. Humans do not panic when confronted with inevitability. They get curious that we began with a minor test. A courtesy, really, standard procedure when a subject exhibits skepticism without open defiance. The deterministic order prefers education to punishment, a controlled demonstration to replace doubt with understanding. I authorized a localized probability compression. The field tightened around the human, Caleb, subtly at first. Paths of motion narrowed. Outcomes that diverged were gently folded back into alignment. It was not designed to harm, only to instruct. To show, unmistakably, that deviation carried consequences. It had been enough to injure elite alien soldiers. I had watched decorated enforcers stumble under it, bones fracturing as gravity re-weighted itself around their intent. Past trainees, selected for mental resilience, had collapsed when they realized their choices no longer mattered. Muscles locked. Balance failed. The lesson was always learned quickly. The compression engaged. Caleb took a step forward, and then didn't. He paused mid-stride, frowned slightly, and shifted his weight. Huh, he said. That's new. The probability field surged, anticipating his most likely adjustment and closing it off preemptively. There should have been no safe movement left. Caleb sidestepped. Not fast. Not panicked. Just a small, lazy step to the side, like avoiding a chair leg in a dim room. The compression snapped shut where he would have been, leaving the space he now occupied untouched. I logged the movement as reflexive noise and allowed the system to compensate. Humans were erratic at micro scales. That was already accounted for. The second phase engaged. Environmental resistance increased. Micro delays inserted between intention and execution. This was where coordination failed, where even disciplined subjects began to falter as their bodies betrayed their minds. Caleb yawned. It was genuine. Unforced. His shoulders rose, his jaw stretched, and his eyes watered briefly before he blinked it away. Sorry, he said. Long trip. The resistance intensified. His next movement should have been sluggish, off balance, painful. Instead, he rolled his shoulders once, adjusted his stance, and exhaled slowly through his nose. Okay, he said. Yeah, I can feel that. No fear. No strain. Just acknowledgement. I authorized the final component of the minor test. A focused kinetic correction formed overhead, sharp, precise, instructional pain delivered in a single, unavoidable vector. It had dislocated joints and ended bravado in seconds. No subject had ever ignored it. It struck. The floor cracked beneath Caleb's feet. The impact echoed through the chamber. He grunted, one knee bending briefly, hand dropping to his thigh. For a moment, just a moment, I felt satisfaction. Then he straightened. Still standing. Still conscious. He looked down at the fractured floor, then back up at the predictive lattice. Is this the warm-up? He asked. The question echoed through the chamber. It was not mocking. It was curious. I hesitated. Only a fraction of a second, but longer than protocol allowed. The lattice compensated automatically, layering compression, resistance, and correction together. This was the threshold where all subjects stopped experimenting and began complying. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. Am I late? He asked, glancing around as if expecting someone else to arrive. The pressure increased again. He squinted slightly. Okay, he said, so this is the part where I'm supposed to stop moving, right? He took a careful step forward. The system adjusted, and he stepped through the adjustment, not because the field permitted it, but because he noticed the delay between prediction and enforcement. My irritation sharpened. One last warning assembled, still within acceptable limits. Enough to end ambiguity. Caleb watched it form, head tilted. Should I be worried? He asked. That was when I understood the test had failed. Not because the human resisted, but because he never accepted it was a threat. He was not reacting to danger. He was testing the prediction. The minor test was meant to demonstrate inevitability. Instead, it had revealed something the lattice had never modeled. A mind that treated prediction as advisory. Caleb looked back at me, expression neutral, almost apologetic. Hey, he said, just so you know, when something keeps insisting it knows what I'm going to do next. He shrugged. That's usually when I start doing things just to see what happens. The chamber fell quiet. The first test ended there, not with submission, not with defiance, but with an unresolved variable standing calmly at the center of a system that demanded closure. The deterministic order does not tolerate unresolved variables. The next step would not be educational. It would be escalation. And for the first time since the lattice was built, I felt a cold, unwelcome realization settle into my certainty. The prediction had not failed because it was wrong. It had failed because the human refused to behave like someone who believed the future was already decided. Annoyed, I authorized escalation. Not because the human had resisted, resistance was expected, but because Caleb's behavior suggested something far more intolerable than defiance. Disbelief. The deterministic order does not negotiate with disbelief. Our authority rests on the simple truth that outcomes, once calculated, occur. To question that was to question the foundation of 10,000 cycles of correctness. So I elevated the response. Protocol dictated certain death. Not a threat. Not a punishment. A conclusion. I authorized the terminal convergence event. The chamber changed. The predictive lattice tightened, shedding excess branches until only one path remained. Probability collapsed inward, squeezing every possible future into a single, narrow corridor that ended immediately. This was not force applied to a body, it was inevitability applied to reality. Elite alien soldiers had died under this measure without ever understanding it had begun. Past trainees had ceased mid-thought, erased by the simple fact that no future remained in which they continued. The system confirmed convergence. Caleb should not have been able to move. Caleb walked forward. One step. The convergence surged to intercept, termination vectors snapping into place where the human would be next. The lattice did not chase actions. It predicted them, placing the end ahead of intent. Caleb adjusted his stride. Barely. The vector struck empty space. I felt irritation harden into anger. I increased resolution. Removed tolerance. The lattice seized total control of outcome selection, choosing for the human before he could choose for himself. Movement should have been impossible. Thought irrelevant. Caleb stopped. Simply stopped. The kill geometry passed through the space he would have occupied had he continued. He remained standing. Hands loose at his sides. Breathing steady. He looked down at the faint distortions around his feet, then back up at me. Oh, he said. You're locking the ending now. Yes, I replied, my voice amplified throughout the chamber. Your actions no longer matter. The result has been solved. Caleb nodded slowly. That explains why this suddenly feels pushy, he said. No fear. No panic. Just observation. He took another step forward. That step did not exist in the lattice. The projections stuttered. Probability trees fractured instead of collapsing. Futures multiplied where none were permitted. The terminal convergence lagged, behind an action already taken. I escalated again. Temporal authority engaged. Time froze. Particles halted mid-motion. Light itself suspended. Causality pinned in place, obedient to deterministic command. This was the final safeguard, the point at which even anomalies ceased. Certain death. Caleb blinked. Slowly. He looked around at the frozen chamber, then flexed his fingers. Time resumed, around him. He stood in a pocket of motion, untouched by the freeze. Well, Caleb said calmly, we're definitely past the warning label. My composure fractured. I poured authority into every layer, probability, time, causation, demanding inevitability assert itself completely. The chamber groaned as the lattice tried to force a conclusion reality itself seemed unwilling to accept. Caleb stood still. Not defiant. Not afraid. Still calm. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "this works great on people who believe predictions are instructions." He shrugged. "I don't." The terminal convergence event collapsed. Not violently. Quietly. Like an equation discovering its assumptions no longer applied. I stood there, prime prognosticator of the ninth deterministic order, watching a physically unimpressive human remain unharmed, unhurried, and unconcerned at the center of a system built to end futures. My escalation had not demonstrated dominance. It had revealed arrogance. We believed certainty was power. We believed inevitability commanded obedience. Caleb treated inevitability as a claim that needed evidence. And in that widening gap between our belief and his behavior, I understood the danger we faced. A prediction is only absolute to those who agree to live inside it. The lattice reached for the ending. The human kept walking from it. As if the future were still open, the ultimate weapon fired. The deterministic order called it the final resolution engine, though weapon was a courtesy term for lesser minds. It did not launch projectiles or release energy. It concluded. Once activated, the engine selected a single outcome across all remaining branches of probability and enforced it retroactively. There would be no divergence, no escape path, no alternate future in which the target persisted. It should have erased the human. Not killed him. Not vaporized him. Not displaced him in time or space. Erased. Every simulation confirmed it. Every prior activation ended the same way. The subject simply ceased to have ever mattered. Memory traces smoothed out. Causal ripples corrected. Reality adjusted as if the anomaly had never been present. The engine engaged. The chamber fell silent. Not the engineered quiet of prediction, but something deeper. Existence itself seemed to pause, holding still as causality rewrote itself. Caleb should have been gone. Instead, he squinted. "Wow," he said. "That's uncomfortable." The engine intensified. Reality folded inward, collapsing futures faster than thought could form. The very concept of after was removed from the space he occupied. Caleb remained. Still standing. Still breathing. He glanced down at his chest, then at his hands, flexing his fingers slowly as if checking whether they were still attached. "Okay," he muttered. "Yeah. That one almost hurt." My cognitive stack rejected the sensory input. The engine surged again, harder, deeper, seeking to erase not just the human, but the possibility that he could exist outside prediction. Deterministic force pressed in from all directions, compressing time, probability, and causation into a single, unavoidable conclusion. Caleb raised one hand. Not defensively. Casually. And caught it. Not energy. Not matter. The ending. His fingers closed around the convergence point where all futures collapsed, and the chamber screamed, not audibly but mathematically. Equations unraveled. Probabilities jittered wildly, suddenly unsure which rules still applied. Caleb winced. "Yeah," he said, shaking his hand once. "You really shouldn't grab conclusions without a safety margin." The final resolution engine strained, trying to enforce its mandate. Reality itself seemed torn between obeying the system that had governed it for millennia and the human now physically interfering with inevitability. Caleb leaned slightly into his grip. Not straining. Not exerting force. Just refusing to let go. The convergence fractured. Not explosively. Logically. Assumptions failed. Retrocausal corrections conflicted. The engine attempted to resolve paradox by escalating, only to discover that escalation itself was now one of the variables being questioned. Caleb released his hand. The ultimate weapon collapsed. Not destroyed. Invalidated. The chamber lights flickered as futures spilled back into existence, messy and unresolved. Prediction streams jittered, branching uncontrollably. The deterministic lattice lost coherence, no longer able to decide which outcome it was supposed to enforce. Caleb rolled his shoulders, exhaling. "Okay," he said. Yeah. Don't do that again. He looked up at me. At the prime prognosticator. At the order that had never been wrong. At a civilization that had just watched its final guarantee fail. His expression was not triumphant. It was mildly disappointed. You should aim higher, he added, after a moment. Or, maybe lower. Honestly, it's hard to tell what you were optimizing for there. The word struck harder than any threat. The ultimate weapon, our absolute certainty, had failed. Not because it lacked power, but because it assumed inevitability was something everyone accepted. Caleb glanced around the chamber as probability noise continued to build, futures multiplying faster than the lattice could track. You know, he said conversationally, where I'm from, when someone says the outcome's already decided. He shrugged. That's usually when people start getting creative. He turned away, walking back toward the center of the chamber as if nothing remarkable had occurred. Is that all? He asked over his shoulder. Because if that was your best case, you might want to revisit your assumptions. The deterministic order did not answer. It could not. The perfect prediction had reached its conclusion, and a human had treated it like a suggestion, caught it, and let it go. My hands trembled. I noticed it only because the deterministic lattice flagged involuntary motor variance, an anomaly logged and highlighted in red. I locked my fingers together behind my back, forcing stillness through discipline alone. We do not tremble. We ended that flaw generations ago. So I stopped watching the human, and I checked the data, not the failing projections, not the collapsing futures multiplying beyond acceptable bounds. The origin file. Planetary designation, Sol 3. Common name, Earth. Gravity, 1.0 standard. Galactic sapient mean, 0.73. Sustained exposure above 0.85 increases injury rates, degrades skeletal integrity, and accelerates fatigue in most species. Entire civilizations engineered themselves lighter to escape it. Earth did not. Every human step carries more weight. Every fall costs more. Every movement is resistance training disguised as existence. Atmosphere. Oxygen-rich to the point of toxicity. Continuous oxidative stress at the cellular level. Combustion-friendly, chemically aggressive. Humans breathe a slow poison from birth. They adapted. Climate. Chaotic. Unstable. Violent temperature swings. Unpredictable weather systems. No equilibrium. No guaranteed seasons. No stable baseline to plan around. Survival depends on reacting faster than conditions change. Predators. Pack hunters. Endurance-based. Persistence over speed. Capable of learning during pursuit. On Earth, prey survives by awareness. Predators survive by refusing to stop. Disease environment. Fast mutating. Immunity gained through survival, not avoidance. Earth does not remove threats. It applies them repeatedly until only what adapts remains. I scrolled. Human physiology was not impressive. It was forgiving. Flexible skeletal structures that remodel under stress. Muscles optimized not for peak output, but for endurance and recovery. Nervous systems noisy enough to keep functioning through pain, fear, fatigue, and partial failure. They were not fast. They were stubborn. Then cognition. Predictive accuracy, moderate. Reaction speed, average. Fear response, present. But beneath it, decision-making under uncertainty. Humans act without complete information. They proceed without guarantees. When outcomes look inevitable, they do not submit. They experiment. They assume models are incomplete. On Earth, systems fail constantly. Tools break. Weather lies. Authority collapses. Plans unravel mid-execution. Survival does not belong to those who obey predictions. It belongs to those who adapt after predictions fail. I replayed the encounter. Not the escalation. Not the weapon. The moment Caleb caught the ending. He had not panicked. He had not resisted. He had treated inevitability like a hypothesis. That was the flaw. Our entire civilization was built on the assumption that certainty commands obedience. Humans never evolved under certainty. They evolved under pressure, randomness, and loss. under conditions where prediction was useful, but never trusted completely. On Earth, trusting a forecast without contingency is how you die. So humans learned something we never did. A future that cannot be changed is not safety. It is a trap. Earth was a death world. Not because it killed indiscriminately, but because it never stopped testing what lived on it. Humans were not exceptional. That word implies rarity. They were adapted. Every human raised under crushing gravity, corrosive air, unstable climate, predation, disease, and systemic failure. Every one of them learning the same lesson long before they could articulate it. If something insists the outcome is fixed, then the system deciding that outcome is the problem. The trembling in my hands stopped. Not because the fear faded, but because it clarified. We had built a universe where prediction replaced choice. Humans brought choice back. Not loudly, not violently, calmly. By refusing to cooperate with inevitability, I finally understood the danger. Not that humans could break our predictions, but that they never believed predictions were commands in the first place. To us, the future was something to be calculated. To humans, the future was something to be argued with. And standing in the ruins of a perfect forecast, watching probability unravel around a calm, unimpressive human, I understood the truth we should have seen from the beginning. You cannot build a flawless prediction in a universe that produces humans, because humans are what happens when survival depends on continuing forward. After the future says stop, that was when I understood. Not when the final resolution engine failed. Not when probability splintered into uncontrolled futures. Not even when the humans stood calmly amid the ruins of our certainty, as if this were an inconvenience rather than an existential collapse. I understood when I accessed the assignment record. It was not classified, not encrypted, not flagged as sensitive. It sat in the administrative layer of the deterministic order's records, attached to the visit for scheduling, access permissions, and, most insultingly, expense justification. Paperwork. I opened it because I needed something, anything, that still obeyed rules. The file loaded instantly, and it was ordinary. Name, Caleb Morgan. Species, human. Affiliation, Terran Bureau of Interstellar Coordination. Status, civilian. Role, logistics analyst. Secondary duties, systems review, failure path identification, process optimization. I stared at the designation longer than protocol allowed. Humanity had not sent us a warrior. They had not sent a general, a scientist, or a specially trained counterprognosticator. There were no combat augmentations listed. No command authority. No emergency clauses for escalation beyond observe, evaluate, report. They had sent a clerk. A logistics officer. Someone whose daily work involved broken systems, contradictory requirements, delayed inputs, and plans that looked perfect on paper and failed catastrophically in reality. Someone trained to notice when outputs stopped matching assumptions, and to refuse to proceed until someone admitted it. The humiliation did not arrive all at once. It spread. Caleb had not come to challenge the deterministic order, had not come to threaten us, had not come to prove humanity superior. He had come to check our math. I accessed additional Terran documentation, dread tightening with each line. Performance notes. Questions, inevitable outcomes. Flags edge cases others dismiss. Uncomfortable with systems that claim certainty. Supervisor comment, appended casually. Good with legacy models everyone's afraid to touch. Legacy models. That was us. I looked back at Caleb. He was crouched near a fractured projection node, tapping at the flickering lattice with mild irritation, like someone dealing with a malfunctioning terminal. You've got a feedback loop here, he said, not accusing, just factual. Prediction reinforces itself, so you stop seeing alternatives. He glanced up at me. That's not forecasting. That's wishful thinking with equations. This had never been a confrontation. It had been training. A low-risk assignment. A routine evaluation. A chance for humanity to see what happened when a supposedly perfect prediction system encountered a human who did not treat predictions as authority. This was their idea of easy duty. A working vacation. On Earth, humans send engineers into disaster zones, medics into war zones, coordinators into collapsing infrastructures. Not because those places are safe, but because those are the people who know what to do when plans fail. Caleb had not broken the deterministic lattice with strength or genius. He had broken it the way any competent logistics officer breaks a flawed process. By refusing to accept the outcome is fixed as a valid answer. Our predictions assumed fear, assumed resignation, assumed compliance once inevitability was demonstrated. Caleb assumed none of that. I finally asked the question that should have terrified me from the beginning. If you are not a warrior, I said carefully, why were you sent? He looked genuinely surprised. Because you don't send fighters unless you want to fight, he said. And we weren't here for that. He gestured around the chamber, at the shattered projections, the uncontrolled futures, the deterministic orders struggling to recompute reality. We send people like me when something claims it already knows how things will end. He shrugged. Someone has to check whether that assumption holds up. He tapped his wrist display, already compiling notes. Then he looked at me and delivered the line that would be translated, archived, and repeated across the galaxy until it became doctrine. This is what humanity sends when it's not even trying. No threat, no pride, just fact. Caleb turned to leave, utterly unconcerned with whether anyone stopped him, certain, without calculation, that nothing could. I remained behind, surrounded by a system that had never been wrong, until it met a human on easy duty. Humanity had not come to conquer us. They had come to audit us. And they had sent a clerk to do it. That was the final humiliation. Not that a human defied our perfect prediction, but that they did it without humanity even bothering to send a warrior. That I submitted my report that day. Not after the chamber was sealed. Not after the deterministic lattice stopped screaming itself into recursive failure. Not after the order convened emergency councils to debate language like anomalous deviation and temporary predictive instability. That day, while futures were still spilling out of containment, while causality refused to line up neatly, while the human, Caleb, had already departed, his visit filed under civilian consultation, completed. I wrote the report myself. No euphemisms. No philosophical padding. No attempt to preserve institutional dignity. I began with the simplest possible statement, one that invalidated centuries of doctrine. The prediction was correct. The assumption behind it was not. I detailed everything. The minor test. The escalation. The terminal convergence. The activation of the final resolution engine. Every protocol executed flawlessly. Every result failed. Not because the system lacked power, but because it relied on a premise humanity does not accept. That inevitability is authority. Humans do not believe that. To them, inevitability is a claim that must survive contact with action. I appended Earth's environmental data without commentary. Earth gravity, higher than standard. Atmosphere, chemically aggressive. Climate, unstable. Biosphere, predatory, competitive, adaptive. Then a single line beneath it. This world does not reward submission to forecasts. I explained, briefly, clinically, that humans evolved in conditions where prediction is useful but never sufficient. Weather changes. Tools fail. Plans collapse. Systems insist they are stable right up until they kill you. On Earth, trusting a model without contingency is not optimism. It is negligence. So humans learn something our order never modeled. A future you cannot argue with is a future you cannot survive. I saved the personnel detail for last. Human representative was a civilian logistics analyst. No combat training. No command authority. Assignment classification, routine. Humanity had not sent a warrior. They had not sent a fleet. They had not sent a threat. They had sent someone trained to notice when systems confuse confidence for correctness. That had been enough. Then I reached the recommendation section. I did not soften it. I wrote exactly what the galaxy needed to understand. Recommendation. Do not threaten Earth. Do not test humans. And whatever you do, never make them angry. I expanded, Because clarity matters. Do not threaten Earth. Threats help humans prioritize. Once humans identify a source of pressure, they do not de-escalate when the threat withdraws. They de-escalate when it no longer exists. Do not test humans. Tests imply limits. Humans treat limits as provisional. If tested, they will explore edge cases until the test itself collapses. Never make them angry. Human anger is not loud. It is methodical. By the time it manifests, every other option has already been attempted and documented. I added one final line, unauthorized but necessary. Humans do not obey predictions. They challenge them. And if the prediction insists on being right, they will prove it wrong out of principle. I transmitted the report. Acknowledgement arrived instantly. Response did not. That silence spread. The deterministic order quietly revised its doctrine. The phrase perfect prediction vanished from official language, replaced with something far less comforting. Advisory forecasting. Among analysts and junior prognosticators, the story spread not as policy, but as legend. Of a chamber that showed every ending. Of a future declared inevitable. Of a human who looked at it and kept walking anyway. They ask me now what humans are like. I answer carefully. They are not stronger than us. They are not smarter than us. They are not immune to fear. They are unwilling to stop. They assume systems will fail and plan to continue regardless. They distrust certainty. They treat inevitability as a challenge, not a verdict. They believe the future is not something to be discovered, but something to be negotiated with reality, one step at a time. I still serve the deterministic order. But there is one concept I will never again approve. A final outcome. Because humanity has taught us the most dangerous lesson a predictive civilization can learn too late. You can calculate every path. You cannot force beings who evolved by refusing to stay on them. And if humanity ever decides that the galaxy itself has become too certain, they will not announce it. They will not argue. They will simply refuse to follow the prediction. And the rest of us will have to learn how to live with the future being open again.